If you're in law enforcement, you know this job is different. It's not like working retail or sitting behind a desk. There's a weight to it, a responsibility that follows you home, that sits with you long after the shift ends. I want to tell you about my very first ride-along. I was riding with an officer here in Maysville, and honestly, it had been a pretty uneventful night. We were heading back, and he was getting ready to drop me off at home around midnight when a call came out. Possible overdose. He hit the lights and sirens, and we were flying to this apartment. EMS was already on scene when we got there, and I remember walking in and just being in complete sensory overload. The apartment was a mess. It smelled like smoke. There was mashed potatoes cooking on the stove, just sitting there bubbling away. And in the bedroom, there was a woman who had taken a bottle of pills. She died just a few days later. We cleared the scene. He took me home, and I remember sitting up for a couple of hours that night, just processing everything I'd seen, everything I'd felt. The next day, I checked in with the officer, wanted to see how he was doing, and you know what he said? To him, it was just another call. That's when I realized the weight of this work. What shakes a civilian to their core is Tuesday night for you. And somewhere along the way, between the calls and the chaos and the paperwork, it's easy to forget what you do actually matters, that it's more than just a job. Today, I want to remind you, it is more than that. A lot of people, they get into law enforcement because they want to help people, make a difference, stand up for what's right. But over time, maybe it's the bureaucracy, maybe it's the public criticism, maybe it's just the sheer exhaustion. It starts to feel like just another paycheck, just another shift to survive. But I want to challenge that thinking, because your work as an officer isn't just a job. It's a calling, and it matters deeply, not just to your community, but to God. Let me read you something the Apostle Paul wrote in Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, the avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Now, Paul was writing to Christians living under the Roman government, not exactly a friendly regime, not exactly a government that loved the church. Yet he reminds them that authority and order ultimately come from God. Now, that doesn't mean that every leader is perfect. It doesn't mean every system gets it right. But it does mean that the idea of protecting people, of bringing justice and keeping peace, those things reflect God's character. Paul says that the one in authority is God's servant for your good. That's you, whether you realize it or not. When you step into chaos and bring order, when you protect the vulnerable, when you stand between danger and the innocent, you're doing something sacred. You're reflecting something of God's heart for people. You're not just enforcing laws. You're part of how God brings order into a broken world. Let me read you one more verse. This one's from John chapter 15, verse 13. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. Now, you've probably heard that verse before. Maybe you've seen it on a memorial wall or heard it at a memorial service. I know I have. Here, Jesus is talking about sacrificial love. It's the kind of love that risks everything for the sake of others. That's what you live every single shift. You put on a vest, knowing that there's a chance you might not come home. You run toward danger while everyone else runs away. You make split-second decisions that can mean life or death for you or for someone else. So whether you realize it or not, that echoes the heart of God. I want to pause here, and I want to give you a few questions to think about. You don't have to answer them out loud. Just let them sit with you for a minute. First, what motivated you to choose this line of work originally? Think back to the beginning, before the politics, before the burnout, before the public turned on you. What drew you to this? Second, what parts of the job still remind you that it matters? Maybe it's a specific call. Maybe it's a person you helped, or maybe it's just that moment when you know you made a difference, even if no one else saw it. Third, how do you keep your sense of purpose when it starts to feel routine or heavy? Because it does get heavy. The weight compounds. So how do you keep going? And finally, what do you think it means that your authority and role ultimately come from God? Not from a badge, not from a department, but from something bigger than all of that. So take a minute. Think about those questions. Look, I know one of the hardest things about this job is how it wears you down. Over time, the sense of calling that once drove you can get buried under stress, politics, and public perception. You get tired of just being the bad guy, tired of being second guessed, tired of doing everything right and still getting criticized, tired of seeing the worst of humanity day after day after day. And it's easy to start thinking, why does this even matter? Why do I keep doing this? Here's what I want you to hear. God hasn't forgotten your purpose, and He hasn't given up on you. When you step into chaos and bring calm, that matters. When you help a person in crisis, that matters. When you stand between the innocent and harm, that matters. You're not just clocking in, clocking out. You're living out something sacred. You are part of how God brings order, justice, and care to a broken world. You're not perfect. None of us are. But you're part of something that matters deeply. So here's what I want to challenge you with this week. Before your next shift, take 30 seconds in the car. Before you walk into roll call, before you hit the street, just pause. Pray. Or if prayer feels weird, just reflect. God, help me serve with integrity and purpose today. That's it. Simple, but powerful. Because when you start your shift with that kind of intentionality, it changes how you see the work. It reminds you why you're doing this in the first place. As I close, let me leave you with this. You are more than a badge number. You're more than a uniform. You're more than the worst call you've ever been on or the mistakes you've made. You're a person with a calling, and that calling matters. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there.